It's just a couple of days before Los Angeles, and there's been a number of roster moves. So will that impact where exactly teams favor in the power rankings? Well, let's find out in this episode. COD fans, good to see you guys back. IHOLDSHIFT with you. It's been a busy last couple of weeks. Busy month and a half, actually, for me, if I'm being completely candid to you. But we're going to be trying to get these videos out at least on some kind of a regular basis. We've got power rankings, obviously, right now. Coming out tomorrow will be our draft buff fantasy now. And then we'll have our prediction video popping on Friday for you guys. So let's dig into it. There's been a number of moves with amateurs being not only put onto rosters, but onto starting rosters. So let's take a look to see what our top 12 teams look like, starting at the very bottom at number 12. Optic Gaming LA, still here. I can't say that's a surprise, I think, to many of you. They've won 3 maps. They are 0-4. They look awful. They don't look like they got much better from when we previously saw them in Minnesota to when we saw them in Atlanta. They did go and find a map versus Florida, if you want to be somewhat positive, and they did have a very close series versus Florida, but still, I don't think this roster is just not working. Flat out, they are 12th in hardpoint, 11th in search and destroy, and 12th in domination. 3 map wins. Number 11, going up into that area, in that space, will be the Toronto Ultra. Now, this is a team that, again, over the weekend only played 2 games, but they took Chicago to 5, and they took a map off of Paris. So should they be higher than maybe we have them here? My initial reaction is no, and my only real reason why is because I think this team could use some sub-ups as well. Flat out, this has not been a team that has looked very, very good. Again, the whole bans thing has been better for them maybe than Metals was previously, but I think there are still core issues with this squad, specifically when you take a look at them in the respawn. In the search and destroy, they actually are 4th overall. A 4-4 S&D total with a plus 0.75 round differential is good enough for 4th in the league. The respawn is where things are becoming more and more of a concern. They're 1-5 in domination with a minus 29 point differential. They technically, because they've won a map, they are not the worst team in domination, but they have the worst differential in domination. And then the same thing for hardpoint. They're only 4-8. Not good. A lot of things need to change for this squad when it comes down to the respawn specifically. And maybe it has to do with the fact that they're just playing kind of slow. And they need someone who can get in there, play fast, and get some kills on rotations and things like that where it comes to being a solo player towards flags, whether you're talking about hardpoint or domination. In my 10th spot, and you'll notice that not a lot of these teams have moved, is the LA Gorillas up next. Now, my biggest question mark for this team is the fact that they're putting in Blast, Vivid, and Spart. And I think that those 3 players are generally better individual additions than the 3 that they're replacing. But the big question mark is, will they have had enough rehearsal time with the other 2 guys to actually be a formidable force this weekend? My answer is generally no, going into it. You take a look at what this team has been able to do so far in their previous roster, and they're not really good anywhere. They're 10th in hardpoint, 8th in search, 9th in domination. They don't have a winning record in any of those, but they are 3-3 in the search and destroy. Now, you got to keep in mind that they are in a pool where they could actually do relatively well, simply because they've got Optic Gaming LA first. I expect that to be a win, but then they will go up against the winner of Minnesota and Seattle. I don't see them winning that matchup, and personally speaking, I also don't see this team beating Seattle, at least as of right now, and you'll see them in the 9th place here because of that. The Seattle Surge, again, I don't have them moving anywhere. The biggest concern for this squad is their search and destroy, flat out. I'm interested to see if Pander can make maybe a better addition to get this squad going when it comes to search in specific, but their respawn has been just okay as well. Hardpoint, they're 8th, they're dead last in search and destroy, but this is actually the 3rd best domination team. They're 4-1, and with good wins versus Florida, Toronto, and LAG, I just think that this team is in a better caliber than you would see in the teams that are just below them in the rankings currently. In my 8th spot, the New York Subliners, and the rumor now is that Happy's not the one actually starting. It'll be Mac Melts. And if that's the case, I think, again, they just stay here in the 8th spot. This is a team that, again, is struggling across every single map mode combination currently. They're 3-5 in hardpoint, they're 2-4 in search, and they're 1-4 in domination, although their 1 win in domination did, of course, come against the Atlanta FaZe on Hackney Yard, if you remember back to that. That, for the rankings, means that they're 9th, 10th, and 10th. So should they be a little bit lower? I initially was thinking, yes, they probably should be. But with the addition of Mac, who is probably one of the more explosive players to enter the scene from the amateur scene this year, I think they're actually going to do better with him in the mix than they previously were with Trey, with 0. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that squad going into this weekend. They've got Dallas first. Don't like their chances there. Plus, they've got Atlanta and Florida in the mix. They might still come out not winning any series, but I expect them to win some maps and maybe in surprise fashion. Going into my 7th spot to round out my bottom 6, I have the Paris Legion, and this is actually one of my only of my 2 teams that have moved in the power rankings. They have dropped 2 spots for me, and I think we're starting to see that this team, yeah, there are some good moments from it, but generally speaking, the way they play the game, they're very predictable, and teams are starting to figure them out. Not to mention the fact that they're search and destroy. They're doing one of the best at getting first bloods, but not converting on them. So there's definitely some core issues going on when it comes to them in search. They technically are 9th overall in the search and destroy at an even 6-6. They do hold a 6-3 record in the domination, but at a minus scoreline, which means to say that they are winning close doms and then losing at a little bit more of a differential. And then the same thing actually is the case in their hard point. They're the 4th best technically by record and differential, but only being 9-7 and having a minus 7.5 differential just goes to show that their wins are close, their losses are generally pretty bad. So when it comes to this Paris squad, they did beat the Toronto Ultra, but they lost twice to Minnesota, one of which was a closer series. It just seemed like the way that Minnesota played them, that they had them figured out, and I think more teams are going to have them figured out as well. Staying in my top 6 at the 6th spot, the London Royal Ravens. This team has been incredible in search and destroy, mostly on the back end of the Marshall twins of Wuskin and Scraps, who have looked good, but they found a way to use Dylan in a very interesting way that not a lot of other teams have been able to use their SMG players on search. So they're the 3rd best overall search team. They're just 4-4 overall, and they're right in the middle of the rankings when it comes to the standings, because they only have 40 points. However, they've shown some good improvements in hardpoint and domination over the course of the last couple of weeks. They played a lot of very close series in Dom when they played domination versus both Florida and Atlanta, and the same thing could be said, I think, generally, with one exception to Florida smoking them on St. Petro. A lot of their hardpoints were also within a hill and a half of being right there, or they were within a couple of points, or they won by a definitive margin. So when that's the improvement margin for London, I think you're going to start to see that this team is definitely figuring themselves out, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them inch into the top 4 at any given moment in time in the power rankings, depending on what happens with the teams right above them. Speaking of, in my 5th space, I've got the Florida Mutineers, and this is going to feel, I think, for a lot of you like a jarring jump for them, simply due to the fact that they did go 0-3 versus the Atlanta FaZe. But you got to remember that the search and destroy was close, and the St. Petro domination was also only a 10-point game. My biggest question mark for this Florida Mutineers team, who sits right in the middle of the board across all of their map mode combinations, they're 6th in hardpoint, 7th in search, 6th in dom, is will they actually be prepared to play any other dom map besides St. Petro? They played that exclusively at Atlanta and did very, very well there. Will that keep up? Have they found a way to rehearse themselves to go up against Atlanta again on a mode that's not, or on a map rather, that's not St. Petro? It'll be interesting to see. This team is also still holding a very negative differential in hardpoint, which is cause for concern. Minus 24 is actually one of the worst. Actually, it is the worst in the league currently. But again, when they lose, they get smoked. When they win, it's usually tight. But it's even more so the case. When they lose, they do definitely get smoked. So definitely some holes to be plugged here. But I like what I saw from Florida when they play at their full potential, especially with the double ARs that very well could come into play more regularly. I also don't know what the hell's going on with my hair. It's freaking wild, so just deal with it. In my 4th place, I don't have it moving. The Dallas Empire. I expect them to do relatively well this upcoming weekend, considering their pool. It will be an interesting test, though, for them if they have to play up versus Florida or Atlanta. They'll have to play up probably against one of the two of them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when they face up against each other. This team, again, after the Minnesota weekend, they got smoked by both Atlanta and Chicago when they played the first time through. Will they find a way to improve against one of the two teams? Hopefully that will be the case. They've gotten better at search and destroy. They're going up the ladder when it comes to both the dom and the hard point. So if they can find a way to get some extra favor in a map pool this weekend, I expect them to do relatively well. Still sitting in my 3rd spot, and one of the teams I have going into my top 2 for this weekend, just a little bit of a heads up on why I think that. The Minnesota Rocker. These guys look look incredible. Flat out, they were able to do very, very well versus Atlanta. Nearly able to find a 3-0, but just not able to get the rotations on Hackney Yard Dom. Then they got reverse swept. That one hurts a little bit. Also, beating Paris twice, one closer than the other, and then playing Chicago relatively tight as well. It was a close Dom loss by only 10, not even 10 points, by 8 points, a close Gunrunner hardpoint loss, and then it was a round 9 search and destroy. So this team is definitely finding their legs, and I expect them to continue to be very, very good because all 5 players are very talented and they're playing very well together. They're currently sitting 2nd in the Dom, 3rd in the hardpoint in rankings. The only real weak spot, if you look at it technically, would be their search and destroy, as they only sit at a 4-4 there with a .63 positive. Top 2. Nothing has changed, and I think for a lot of you guys, you may have wanted to see Chicago moved. I just can't, after Minnesota losing to Chicago, I can't move them below Minnesota, and Chicago hasn't had a problem with Dallas, so I can't move them below Dallas. If Chicago does not look very good the next time out, or if Minnesota looks great this weekend, I would anticipate a swap here. But the simple fact of the matter is Chicago has lost a single series. Yeah, it was against Florida, and it was a tough 3-2 that they were able to find themselves down against, and they still went 5 versus Toronto. It's tough to dictate that they're going to still be up here, but even in those stat lines, they're still the best domination team, the second best search team, and the second best hardpoint team. You can't argue with the stats, I think, until there's something more definitive that happens either this weekend or the next time we see Chicago play. Then my first spot, still the Atlanta FaZe. The 3-0 in the finals definitely kept them up here. Still have not dropped a series. They're the best teams in both hardpoint and search by a wide margin, might I add to that. They've only lost a single hardpoint and a single search and destroy, and they're the 4th best domination team. Results kind of speak for themselves when it comes to this squad. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is Florida too overrated? Or do you think that one of the teams that made a roster move should be bumped up a little bit higher or maybe even lower than where I currently have them? Interested to hear your thoughts. Coming up tomorrow, the Draft Buff Fantasy Now for all of you draft fantasy league players. And then beyond that, we'll have our prediction video and setup of the format for LA coming out on Friday. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Until the next time, hope you keep pulling it down. Later. Bye-bye.